Frosthaven a good time, I'm having a good time. This is too big. It's a sequel to a game that was already too big. Why is this box so big? Who is it for? Is it the de facto replacement for the original game? All of this and more in today's frankly whopper video. Before we really jump into things though, I am just going to lay out a few simple caveats and ground rules. First of all, this review, it's not for people who are thinking about maybe jumping into Frosthaven as their first experience in this series. Because if you are thinking of doing that, I'd say right now, straight away, it's not for you. Don't do that. It's not a good place to start. It's a big bombshell, done, we've buried it. Secondly, this is going to be a bit of a weird review. Usually we would make an effort to really walk you through exactly what the game is, how it works and all that stuff, and sometimes I do a bad job of that, but this is going to be seriously deep end stuff. We're going to be comparing this game a lot to Gloomhaven. We're going to be jumping straight into the gritty and leaping over the shallow end of, hey, what do we do in this game? So come along with us. I think it's going to be interesting, but don't cry to me if you don't have any armbands. Finally, there might be some spoilers in the review. We're not going to go into any details or any major spoilers here, but there might be some stuff in the B-roll. So if you do want to go into this super fresh, then don't watch this. I mean, that should go without saying, but hey, here we are. You're not allowed to have any pudding until you've finished your dinner, and we've got quite a lot of dinner to get through. Unless, of course, you just go to the timestamp in the video that says pudding and click on that, but don't do that. Before we dig into the first main course though, a little amuse-bouche, madam? A little taster? Let's have a little starter explaining about the original game Gloomhaven and why it was so flipping delicious. That game was huge, fiddly, and without modification using organisers and digital apps to better manage the flow of it all, a truly destructive eater of time. A full campaign might literally take years, and it was very possible and in fact realistic to often spend 3 hours just failing one mission. And despite that, I adored it, and so did you. It rocked our collective baubles to their very core. It was followed by a puzzle-intensive mini-expansion that I always intended to try but just never got around to, and Jaws of the Lion, a small box standalone trimmed-down experience that still featured a staggering amount of cool stuff. And just like with Gloomhaven, it was flipping great because of the intense satisfaction at the very heart of these games. So, you have things on a map that you have to kill, and each character has a unique set of cards that define the things that you can do on each turn. Every round, you choose 2 cards, activating the top action of one card and the bottom of the other one, in whichever order you choose. Each mission starts with giving you a wealth of choices that slowly narrows down as you play cards each turn. And you're also going to lose cards when you pull off really cool, powerful moves, avoid damage that you just don't want to take, and you lose cards every time you rest in order to get back cards you can still use from your discard pile. Which means that your diminishing hand of cards also acts as a timer. It's a countdown timer that you are actively constantly manipulating based on how well you and the other people around the table think things are going. It is the system that defines these games, and it acts like glue, sticking together all of these disparate bitty parts into something that feels remarkably solid. Gloomhaven is MDF, apparently. This is a tense, slightly addictive system that gives each mission its own little arc. If you play too aggressively and overconfidently, the game is going to give you a dose of bad, lumpy hubris. But if you're too cautious and you don't just get it done, we've run out of time. And trying to perfect this racing curve each time you play, getting the line just right, keeps it going. Keeps it fruity, keeps it spicy, keeps it nice. This back and forth dance is maintained beautifully by the fact that as you level up your character, you get new cards to add, replacing something else from your deck. It means the knife edge of possibility is always skittering away from you, and it means that mastery is always gently being shifted away too, in a way that means you don't get frustrated when you never quite manage to grasp it. The highs of true success are genuinely electric, and the lows of failure never get too low because this is a cooperative game. So if things are going really badly, and we all agree, let's cheat! The final trick hidden within these cards is the ease with which they manage to conjure up vivid imagery using what? Some rules and like 2 or 3 words? They mean that combat sequences are so easily animated in your mind. I can see these cards, I can hear them, I can and will do sound effects. And when you do get bored, there are way too many different characters to try in this frankly ridiculous cornucopia of tiny cardboard boxes. Gloomhaven was all of that and so much more. But it was these cards that really made up the spine, the backbone of the game. And that's why it's great to see that this system is still in Frosthaven and it's basically exactly the same. But this time it's blue. For today's review, I'm filming with Tom's copy of Frosthaven, which is impeccably organised using these inserts that were kindly provided by Folded Space. We were also provided with a wooden one from Laserox, which looked nice, but I had concerns that adding any more weight to this box would get us seriously into coffin flop territory. For context, my copy of Frosthaven currently uses no organisers. It's beautiful, wild, naked as it came into the world. It sort of resembles one of those video game goblins that's just been punched in the face for treasure. And gosh, with this full fat sequel, they are really spoiling us. Another set of mystery characters in boxes with unlockable unique abilities, hundreds of missions to go on with tons of different baddies to bash, and a massive stack of magical items to discover or craft. This is basically the new game plus of, yes, I'm free most weekday evenings. And if you thought that the original Gloomhaven was too big, I was looking as if it's there, but that's just Frosthaven again. How many Frosthavens are there? Well, the weight of this thing is just flipping ridiculous. I've had to carry this up and down a few flights of stairs a handful of times, and it's the first board game I've ever reviewed where I haven't let anybody else carry it for fear that I might be responsible for a serious injury. And before you can even start playing the game, you need to pop out all of the cardboard, organise all of the cards, a process so laborious and arcane that it has its own separate mini manual telling you how to do it.
Welcome to Frosthaven! Significant number of components in this game box. Organise the cards using the dividers. Next you will find a stack of 27 punch boards, which you now remove and start punching. Sort and store the remaining cardboard components in their designated slots. Keep punching out all the pieces, there are loads of them. And once you've punched out the 48th sheet of cardboard components, you treat yourself to a little break. We'd recommend calling... Actually, I've changed my mind. Keep punching out and organising. Beneath the plastic inserts at the bottom of the box, you'll find a second copy of Frosthaven. Carefully remove that and then punch out this box's components. Just keep punching. Just keep punching. Just keep punching.
Anyway, so Gloomhaven was a lot, and this might be more. But there is some stuff in here that I'm not especially pleased to see. When I originally reviewed Gloomhaven, I did so before playing the game using digital computer apps. And, you know, the game was a hellish upkeep of micro bits of cardboard and tracking numbers, but I sort of loved that, and lots of other people did and do too. However, once I did start using things to make tracking elements of the game a bit easier, I couldn't really go back. And so when Frosthaven turned up at my house for an emotional reunion, and then it started getting out all of these tiny tokens and the big stack of enemy cards and the sleeves and the new cardboard pieces they've added for tracking initiative order. Oh, yeah. Oh, you've got all that stuff, have you? Yeah. Do you have an app? Great news, it does have an app. An official app. Bad news, it costs £8 which is it's quite, but I suppose you're spending a lot of money on this already, so whatever. Is it good? Sort of. Very mixed. At the moment, the network stuff doesn't really work, but frankly, it's very ambitious. It's trying to allow you to play it online, or having multiple people having their own characters and things being tracked in a shared state game across the table, which means lots of people sitting each looking at their own phone. Not sure how I feel about that. Very cool in principle, currently doesn't work that well. Meanwhile, we've still got the unofficial X-Haven app, which is basically what I used back in the day, and yeah, it's kind of janky, but it is free, and it's better than dealing with quite so much of the little bitty upkeep. And the app being called X-Haven, which does sound like something you're going to get banned from an intranet for visiting. I'm not entirely happy with the naming convention of this series anymore. Gloom, strong word. Haven. The Haven series sounds like a chairlift, a luxury chairlift for the particularly elderly. So I don't know what we call these games. Frosty Glooms? Annual Frostate Test? Gloomhaven? But I don't know what the solution is to this. I mean, if this game hadn't come with every single component and bit that you need to play it without an app, well, that would be good bad. I mean, yeah, you can't play it. You can't play it if you don't have the app. That's bad. But the box would be so much lighter, so much smaller. Oh, that'd be good. So yeah, overall, it's bad good. But seeing this again felt like a weirdly bleak joke. Elemental status stands, please don't dox me, but look, everyone I've spoken to said that they just forgot about this mechanic almost all of the time when playing, and that was fine. And so seeing it back again, completely unchanged? Really? Look, I get why. A cool thing about Frosthaven is you can bring characters from any of the other games and play with them in this campaign. But that does mean that the core mechanics, you can't really alter things too much. That bread and butter core has to stay roughly the same. And that's mostly fine because the bread and butter, as we discussed earlier, the bread and butter is great. And it still is. Missions with your mates, using these cards, these systems, it's great. It's mostly just the same. It's still great. And that's not a very exciting opinion, is it? It's not very interesting. You can probably tell why it's taken us quite a long time to get around to this Frosthaven review. The best thing about Frosthaven, unfortunately, is also the least exciting thing about Frosthaven. But don't say that, Matt. Come on, what else is in the box? What else is new? Well, okay then. Let's get into some of the tiny little details and small changes that we shouldn't really fixate on, but we will, because this game is secretly a spider web of tedious details, and I am into it. Let's get boring. This is the manual for cool original flavour Gloom Beanies. It isn't the best manual, but it does the job it needs to. The core design of the game is resilient enough that it means getting rules wrong is massively unlikely to actually spoil the game in any way. Controversial opinion time now. Let's do the controversial opinion klaxon. The only thing I think a manual for a game like this needs to do is teach you enough to get you to start playing. And gosh, teaching all of this to a group just from the manual? Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, isn't this literally why J. Robert Oppenheimer invented Rodney Smith? And I do know all the rules for Gloomhaven now, right? I don't get them wrong. And I don't think I enjoy the game any more or any less than I did when I was getting loads of things wrong. And the time it's taken me to learn all of those rules is the same amount of time I probably could have trained to be a doctor. This is the manual for Gloomhaven 2 Frostmas Boogaloo. And what has happened? Who's been feeding you? This board game manual has been having double dinners. This manual is better than the original one, no question. But also, confusingly, it is infinitely worse. As a reference, it is joyous. An index of terminology highlights every page that a term is discussed, with a page for the primary rules written in bold. Kiss a chef. But trying to teach the game by reading through this to newcomers? Absolutely not. No. And so Frosthaven is very much a sequel to Gloomhaven, but Gloomhaven was very much a board game video game. So what does a video game board game sequel look like? In video games, most sequels aren't designed to be consumed in a strict sequence. The third one of that game's coming out soon. Maybe I'll check that one out, even though I know that the other one was actually really good and costs a fifth of the price. It's probably because these sequels almost always promise technological improvements that will undoubtedly make previous iterations less enjoyable, as proven to be a fact by 1988's Battle Chess. Still though, it is weird if you jump straight into season 4 of Ozark, for example, because you heard that Jason Bateman's face is really quite sharp in this series. You probably get into a lot of quite interesting but quite brief conversations at parties. So video game sequels are just crispier and more, with that comforting little blanket on the top that just goes, don't worry, it's basically still the same. And most of the changes that you do see are so subtle, a little crackle, a little pop. I'm going to shuffle this over here to make room for this new idea. Little things you can't put your finger on, it's just better. The gunplay, the gameplay just feels tighter, I feel. The mouthfeel of the graphics, 8 out of 10. But for a board game, video game board game, a sequel looks like this. Every rule that's been altered needs to be highlighted specifically as a change, which is, let's face it, messy. It's like World of Warcraft patch notes, but instead of just getting a tiny list of all the changes, all of them get speckled around in this gigantic document of absolutely everything. I mean, it makes sense, but also it's odd. Worse though, because Gloomhaven was played by lots of people had vocal complaints about it. And this manual does primarily feel like a direct response to those who, understandably, felt the original rules were unclear and unspecific. But the resulting document is a tangled jungle of yes buts, if-thens, and to be clear, addendums. It is exhaustive in a way that's impressive, but exhausting. That's right, it's time to fire up Reddit and drop that post. Shut up and sit down. Hate Frosthaven because the manual contains all the rules. Hold on for a minute. Look, when I didn't know all the rules in Gloomhaven, I actually just checked the manual and I've misremembered there being a line being like, if you're not really sure, just do whatever feels like it makes sense, because that was our house rule for such a long time. And yes, it's great having all of the rules properly written somewhere, but the spirit of this game is not, here are all of the rules written very carefully. The spirit of this game is absolutely, what do we think feels right? Because you know, sometimes it's good for you, sometimes it's bad for you, but you always, if you think about it, yeah, it does feel right that slime has actually killed me, unfortunately. So what I want to convey here, and celebrate frankly, is just how odd all of this is. Gloomhaven was a strange game that became a star. And now it has a sequel. Like, if Gloomhaven was a secret love letter to a spreadsheet, then Frosthaven is an annual convention for people who think that Microsoft Excel sheets should be able to legally marry and pre-order your tickets for Incel 2024 now. It's going to be a hot one. And talking of hot, guess what? It's time for pudding. Congratulations, you basically own a town. Yes, we've got road events and city events just like before, but now split into 2 seasons, summer and winter. Winter, as you might expect, it's bad. Time passes, future events get added into your calendar as if you're a human with a life. Yeah, so I think we'll spend the wood to reinforce the barricades, and don't forget we've got brunch next Sunday with Sarah. And you can collectively pool your resources to develop the town, to train soldiers, erect defences, build new facilities and upgrade shops. Oh no, we've been attacked! The buildings need to be repaired! There's a morale meter and all this other stuff because your town has a character sheet all of its own and its own name and human legs. That's not true, I made that up, but core. There's an awful lot of things going on here. And while the characters and card play feel very, very familiar, there's a whole new buffet of unknowns to unlock here in terms of developing this town. But herein lies the curse of pudding. If you aren't careful, it is possible that you will eat your dinner too quickly. I found myself wanting to rush through missions as a means of more rapidly getting to delve into the shiny, all the stuff that was new. And that's something that I never experienced when I was playing Gloomhaven, despite the wealth of unknowns to discover in that box. My main takeaway from Gloomhaven was that it worked because it didn't rely on that thread of breadcrumbs to be sewn through the jump of the experience. No, it was just constantly fun. You weren't playing it to unlock new things, you were playing it because it was fun. The things to unlock just meant that it was promising to continue to be fun for a tremendously long amount of time. And what's not fair is that Frosthaven is almost as fun. But the new thing in Gloomhaven was the combat, and the new thing in this is something else. And, you know, that's not fair, but it is the way that human brains work because they are bad and usually quite stupid. I lovingly compared Gloomhaven to the RPG brawler Dark Alliance. Just enough spice and pow to see you endlessly repeating yourself whilst remaining very happy with that perfect balance of give and take between addictive systems an actual satisfaction. But some of the stuff in Frosthaven feels like it's borrowing from video game design of maybe a decade later. Got multiple overlapping currencies, incremental changes, upgrades that maybe aren't that exciting. The town building metagame within this just doesn't quite spark joy. We regret to inform you that the pudding has got cold. In Gloomhaven, in between the combating mission bits, you just leveled up your characters, and the only interstitial moments came from those road events and those city event cards. This new extended list of steps to go through in between missions doesn't add as much as it aspires to, and it's borrowing from video games, but in a way that I don't think works. There is nothing worse in video games than a 2% stat increase, and honestly, when looking at the upgrade stickers for the starting buildings, that looks pretty 2% to me. Video games sometimes can get away with this. I was particularly fond of Assassin's Creed 2 and the way you slowly rebuilt this little Italian town. Progress was painfully slow and nothing really meant anything on its own, but over time, eventually, you just looked and suddenly went, wow, I did all this. And that doesn't work here because that was a 3D world that you walked around in repeatedly for about 20 hours, and this is just a piece of cardboard with some stickers on it. And it isn't terrible, it's just not able to stop itself from being flattened under the weight of, I guess, the expectations that we had coming into it. The building upgrades, spoilers, quite boring. The same resources you use to make buildings can be used to craft items and equipment. And this feels like it should add texture to the game, but I don't know if this layer of complexity adds much that wasn't already covered by treasure chests and just buying stuff with gold. If I'm honest, the crafting didn't really feel like it was in the game to be more fun, but as a means of balancing things, stopping you from finding something overpowered on a mission that you stumbled into earlier by being like, aha, you found a picture of a treasure you can have at the correct time in the game. I get why, but it's not fun. I do love the way that resources are donated to the town though. It isn't a bank you can dip in and out of, you put things into it, and then that's that. It makes it much more viable to drop in and out of campaigns of Frosthaven, because if you know you're not going to play it for a while, or ever again, just give all of your junk to everybody. And this smoothness is further polished by the tweak that means the battle goals you do to get special ticks to unlock new abilities, you get to choose from 3 now, not just 2. And that's great because it means you're much less likely to end up with one which is impossible or rubbish, but it does also mean that players tend to behave less strangely. And it might seem ridiculous, but this does feel like something's been lost. One of my favourite things about Gloomhaven was this slight edge of uncooperativeness that lingered over the table like a greedy spectre. You should go and kill that enemy. Yes, sure, but maybe I'll just go and grab that treasure, or act like a weirdo. I'm not going to tell you, but it's for a thing. Being occasionally just slightly at odds with other players gave the game a little bit of spicy friction. And for better or worse, it feels like some of that friction is now gone. By giving players more agency and a greater choice, it means also they've got more responsibility for their actions. I mean, I've lost count of times that somebody would say, oh, I didn't have a choice, I had to do it, and you think, and you might look at them and go, but then you'd let it slide and you'd move on. In this instance, that wouldn't be believable. And now, because the game doesn't have your back when you're being a bit of an asshole, it means you're far less likely to be one. People will actually just work together more and choose the objectives that aren't going to cause trouble. Secondly, it's much easier now to retire characters, and the way you find new ones is different. And both of those things on paper sound great, but this increased turnover of characters does mean that you're eroding your sense of commitment to the character that you've chosen. You don't play as them for as long, and so therefore you're less likely to be driven to the greed of saying, yeah, I think my little rat does need that treasure, actually. And this subtle change to the cooperativeness of the game is fascinating, and it's not going to be a problem for everyone. I think for some groups, for some people, this will be a really good change. This will be great. For me, not quite. Although I do think it's really interesting that this game was probably play-tested quite heavily throughout the period of lockdowns and heaviness of COVID. And I'm kind of fascinated about that, in the fact that this game ended up taking away some of those options for people just being slightly mean in a way that I think Could this be a bit of a time capsule of design? Could it have been what the playtester needed more at that time in history? I'm just rambling now, but I thought it was quite interesting. If you don't, that's fine. Next thing.
Hello. If you're watching this video and you are itching to play a game like this, what you should do right now, you should get a copy of Jaws of the Lion. 4 characters rather than 17, 30 scenarios rather than 100, a book of maps rather than dozens of tiles. It's smaller in scope in almost every conceivable way, but I think this slightness doesn't just make this the perfect sample platter to get into these systems, it also makes it a better game? Firstly, it's because you just get to the game so much quicker. Rules are explained quickly and easily and intuitively folded into the batter of your first few sessions. Characters are more immediately fun and snappy to play around with. Setup is instant with this map book that you just flop on the table and go. The story is more pared back, direct and followable across the 30 scenarios of this generous campaign, one that you'll actually finish. And each mission feels distinct from the last because you have this map book. No generic tiles means that these spaces feel more cohesive and readable. So that's my pitch for why Jaws of the Lion is flatly a better game. It's quicker, it's simpler, it's easier, but still very hard, crunchy, complicated, difficult, all the things that people love about the Gloomhaven system, just in a smaller, cheaper, more approachable box. It's so cheap. It's scarily cheap for how much game you get in that box. What are they doing out there to people for this? But you're probably thinking, what's missing? Well, aside from the fact that it's got fewer characters and fewer missions, the legacy stuff is less pronounced. You just go from mission to mission, you upgrade your character, you do less of the admin. But that admin realistically represents such a small proportion of the time that you spend playing Gloomhaven anyway. It's not really why you're there. You're there to play the game. And the game is better, more cohesive, readable, understandable, and enjoyable than it has ever been in Jaws of the Lion. I got rid of my copy of Jaws of the Lion so that I could bring Frosthaven into my collection. I thought this box replaces this box. And I might have been a bit wrong about that, because this whole time I've been trying to make Frosthaven smaller. I've been thinking, how can I replace bits with an app? How can I do the minimum setup possible required on the table? How can I make it so the campaign step is less arduous? How can I make it so that my character is less complicated and gritty and weird to play as? For 90% of people, with the time that you have in your life to play games, get Jaws of the Lion. It's so good. I can't believe we didn't do a video on it. That's my fault. Anyway, that's the end of this.
Thanks so much to today's video sponsor, Tom Brewster. The thing that's really hard about trying to review something like this is you're not really reviewing a game, you're reviewing some changes to an environment. A lot of us have lived in Gloomhaven, and that means that everything you add to this ecosystem nibbles away at something else. Every weed that you pull out, well, it turns out that weed was actually a home where something quite precious previously lived. Or I guess in other words, it's different and I don't like it. No, I don't think that's exactly it. I don't think that Frosthaven is a game that struggles with the changes. It's more that it has issues with duality. Much like the character that I play, the bug-based personality that morphs between being two different, unique personalities. One of them's called David/Jason, and the other one's called Jason/David. This game also feels like it's trying to be two different things within the same confined space. The first part of this little identity crisis comes from the breadth of people that this box is trying to please. Yes, this is a fully inclusive box. You can play this game without having any of the other games. Should you jump into this box without having played any of the other games? Absolutely not, no. But if you do own Gloomhaven, then you already own a lot of these components. There's a level of fiddliness to most of the characters in Frosthaven, which is just so much higher than that in the previous games. The characters are tricky dicky to play. You're only going to be able to enjoy playing them if you're a real nerd for this system, which I am. But even so, I sort of miss the wonky schlockiness of just bumbling around and doing a bad job. More cerebral problems and complicated scenarios was what I thought I wanted from this game, but I'm not sure if it's actually what I need. It turns out, like, playing through missions in which you are two different characters at the same time, each of whom has their own set of cards, it's possibly just a bit more exhausting than I wanted. And that's the first division of the game trying to be two things. For people who've not played it and people who have played it, kind of can't be both. It wiggles back and forth and does that thing in Mario Kart where you're not sure to go left or right and just slams into the barrier. The second division here is between bitty cardboards and apps. This new loot system, oh, it's pretty neat or a massive pain, depending on whether or not you've got a decent phone or an iPad. Look at these new treasure pouch tokens, they're great, I love them, they're so satisfying to place and to collect. But also there's a deck of cards that you have to build differently for each mission you play to alter the distribution of potential things that you can find in these pouches. Oh, I can do it in an app. Goodness gosh, thanks. And when I'm using digital assistants to keep track of things, out of this whole tray, these treasure pouches are the only thing I'm actually using. And I know that some people absolutely hate using apps, and I think it's really important that you do have everything you need to play the game without having the internet or power. But this is what the game looks like if you take away everything that I'm not using because I'm using apps. You multiply that across thousands of copies and that is a lot of stuff. And the same thing was true with Gloomhaven, absolutely. But they had no way of predicting that, all right? That happened after the game came out. When they were making this game, they knew that tons of people played Gloomhaven a lot using apps, and they knew that lots of people would do the same thing with Frosthaven. So it's kind of not the same situation exactly. And yes, this might just seem like I'm talking about a smaller, cheaper box, something more ecological, but this isn't just a production issue. The problem is, when you have a game that's trying to design itself to be too many different things at once, it starts to actually affect the game. In addition to the unofficial apps and the official app that you could buy, you've got the option of paying for a fully voiced professional read-through of all of the game's writing that's been made by working with a third party. Now, that's kind of interesting and I'm kind of tempted to do my own read-through using just one voice for all of the characters.
Ambrose Raiders, we're doomed, cries an elderly porter beside you. We've come all this way for nothing!
But then you've got this situation where arguably you've got a lot of writing which is trying to be both radio play drama and your mate Dave does his best at trying to read it out. There was a lot of brevity and simplicity to the writing in Gloomhaven that made it a lot easier and more enjoyable to read out. Here though, it feels like the emphasis is more on the writing than it is the reading. And bits of flowery language from time to time and interesting phrasing, they catch people out. They mean that people stumble when they're reading. And to be absolutely shameless for a moment, I'm not a game designer, but one of the bits of game design I have done was the expansion for monikers, which you can buy. One of the main things we learned when we were designing that was that we shouldn't be too clever whilst writing information on the cards because often people would just read it out. And if they read it out and couldn't read it out, it made them feel stupid. The writing here isn't bad. It isn't pretentious or irritating. It just doesn't always feel like it's on the side of the players, both in the sense of the ludological and the Shakespearean. And I'm allowed to write stupid lines like that because I'm the only person who has to read this script. Too many paragraphs in this game should have been a sentence. More writing can better flesh out the world, but only if people read it. And honestly, the moment that I'm starting to run out of breath and I sense that everyone else around the table is getting a little bit zoned out, blah, 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 wizard, blah, 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 ancient corduroys of power, kill them all, let's go. But in some cases, the writing is really successful. Quite early in the campaign, it does some lovely work of introducing a character that's in charge of the town. And it has them appearing in the event cards as well as the mission descriptions in a way that really helps you establish a better foundation for the wider theme and environment of the game. In Gloomhaven, it was very easy to just find yourself faced with a map of stickers and maybe we were doing something for a wizard. Was it a bad wizard? Let's just give them the artifact. Oh, it was a bad wizard. I remember now. Yeah. Thankfully, things here are clearer, richer, and even less trad fantasy. In a genre still packed with giant rats in a cellar, it's refreshing that the first real sub-quest in Frosthaven can be broadly described as weird crabs. And texture like this is incredibly important here because, as I mentioned earlier, everything is honestly very blue. The unlockable puzzle book feels like a pretty vital new addition, spicy. And how delightful is this chart of unlockable potions? And these advent calendars of unlockable missions are a delightful new addition to the formula. The stickers that you add to your map are on the back of these little perforated windows, and you're then left with some iconography that makes it easy to get a steer on what you want to do next. But does that make the whole board with the stickers on a map even more of a frivolity? Actually, no. Being able to recap what you've done by following these arrows backwards, and if you need to, looking up numbers in the book again and being like, oh yeah, we burnt down that, oh, burn this. It all helps you develop context for the map, propping up the world with a splodge of almost earned geography. And I think because at the end of every mission, you're also often updating your town with new stickers, it actually reminds you to do the world map. Because it was a fun thing in the previous game, but often it was that, I'll do it later tier of admin. However, gentle spoiler territory here, but there is a downside to having these clear paths, in the fact that most people, when you're playing a big, explory world RPG like this, you don't tend to, finish things, you know? You finish things at the end. It's fun to go and see new things, and a lot of the cool rewards come at the end of some of these quest lines. And most of the people I've spoken to tend to dabble around a bit in a way that maybe the game doesn't reward. Alright, so it's ludicrous, but the campaign manual is now quite slick. You start off a mission, it tells you all the bits you're going to need to find in the box, but then it doesn't show you the configuration of future rooms until you then read a bit in the second book. Well, in Gloomhaven, the entire mission configuration was all on those pages, which meant you had to try and stop yourself from using your peripheral vision, which is impossible. In practice, it meant that one player set up the mission to minimize the bleed of spoilers around the table, whereas now, we can all do it together, we can all help. So why don't you just put your phone down for a minute and find the ice token that we need for this? No, that's snow. No, that's another type of snow. No, that's a log of cocaine. Come on, Thomas. And I can sit and poke fun at the jagged little mess of quite similar tokens, but this sort of messiness was what I loved about Gloomhaven, and in spite of it, I guess what I'm getting at here is that in many ways, Frosthaven is a less messy game. And I might like it less because of that. Oh, sorry, Matt, what? I'm calling the police. The characters in this game just feel more balanced. It all feels much more play-tested and considered. And yet the safety features they've added to the roller coaster take something away. Gloomhaven is my go-to example of a resilient game. You can play that and just get loads of rules wrong and it's still solid. We forgot about those cards for 3 sessions. That's fine. When we weren't messing the game up, the game was sort of messing itself up sometimes. That mission was way too easy. That one was way too hard. It was erratic and it didn't matter. Frosthaven as a box, understandably with so many watching as it walked out onto the stage, just didn't feel as sure of itself. And Gloomhaven wasn't some poster child for clear, confident design, but it did feel like a statement. If anything, a whisper of a statement, just arriving on the scene with this gigantic, strange box of things and going, hello, would you like to play this? Sorry, what? You're this brilliant, gigantic RPG with weird ideas and seemingly infinite scope? Hello? But faced with the bright lights and amplification of thousands of fans asking what comes next, it's impossible not to detect just a flicker of stage fright. Gloomhaven felt like the game that Isaac Childress wanted to play, whereas Frosthaven feels like it was made for us. And gosh, how rude of me to sit here and complain about that. But I just think there's something powerful about listening to artists and creators through the work that they create that somehow gets lost when that becomes a conversation. And if you disagree with me, then that's fine. Please feel free to go out and enjoy literally every piece of successful modern media. But I keep going back to that rulebook and the way that the rulebook feels like a direct conversation with the fan base. Because when you're surrounded by a really wide circle of people, you can't have a direct conversation without turning your back on someone else. My self-help book will be available in shops 2020, 2020, 2020. This isn't something that we've discussed or discuss much on Shut Up and Sit Down because it's rare that any one creator or any one game has the kind of reverberations, the impact of something like this. With thousands of new games being released every single year, the vast majority of board games aren't a conversation. They're just a one-way dialogue, sort of screaming into the void. That's a bit too real, actually. Can we cut some B-roll of some minis bashing each other with sound effects?
Hello and welcome to the interstitial bonus segment in the Shut Up and Sit Down review of Frosthaven that I'll be titling The Insert, also known as A Great Blue Glacier of Foam Core, also known as The Sunday That I Will Never Get Back, also known as Limitless Potential in Tiny Coffins, and also known as The Frosthaven Insert Was My Game of the Year 2022. When you look at Frosthaven and you try and assess it as a game, you might be tempted to look at its systems. You might look at its legions of pieces, its preposterous scale, its slick card combat, its mountainous ambition. But listener, viewer, content consumer, if you're to dissect the emotional core of Frosthaven, its icky, gooey heart, you must first dissect the insert. Now, of course, the insert arrives before the game, but even its arrival is sticky with anticipation. The tracking information is the start of what will be the biggest, most all-consuming of games, the start of the devouring of your weekends, the start of the game. But it's also the end of all games. This box will, in cuckoo-like fashion, eject lesser games from their lofty perch in your regular Thursday evening game night. This is the despot of the Kallax, the gargantuan blue jewel of your collection, and the insert is the apparatus of its reign, the envoys sent forth to sound the trumpets that herald its arrival. And you must make preparations. You start to assemble. Each box of the Frosthaven insert is a teaser. The form of these boxes hint to their function. What future treasures will these contain? You punch out, lay out, dry assemble, glue long edges, glue short edges, glue, assemble and air dry your dozens of treasure chests bereft of their most precious good time cargo. And across its many missions or scenarios, its mechanics grow in complexity. From Tray 4 onwards, you have to deal with multi-part chambers. From Tray 9 onwards, you must cross great chasms of crisscrossing latticework. And Trays 14 and 15 have you duel with little fiddly end pieces. This insert is its own DIY campaign that gets trickier with each assembly, and it may be the only campaign you will finish. But in that middle moment, you're in the eye of the storm. Fingers caked in glue gunk, bottle concave and waning. The light is getting lower and the trays demand more. You feel tired, but this cannot be the end. You remember that this game is to be your greatest adventure. You remember your role as the host, the one who organizes. You remember that you are the person who says, "It's okay, don't worry, I'll pack it away later on." This glue is you. By slowly securing these panels together, you might just find a home for that most crucial component, the players. By doing this, you might ensure their continued attendance to that most important box housing components, your home. You press on. Through the tricky box 12 and its bamboozling halfway wall, the energy-sapping quadruplet of trays 14A through 15B, all the way up to that final tray that ties it all together, the last rush, the last level, the final boss of the Frosthaven insert. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair, for my blue beast has several chambers and 2 layers. The Frosthaven insert was my game of the year 2022. This moment, when all these tiny boxes spread across your table, this moment is the apex of this box. This moment is when Frosthaven radiates an anticipation that is the truth of board games. This is the Rosetta Stone of Kickstarter, the unfortunate DNA helix round which this hobby revolves. This is the Enigma code for Frosthaven as a whole. This is not a game, it is a miasma of ideas swirling and colliding. You are giddy with anticipation for a game that you have wanted for years and dreamed of for more. And then, with all the excitement in the world, you finally play it. And it's good.
And so that is Frosthaven, the gigantic sequel to the gigantic game. Is it for everyone? No. Is it for newcomers? No, we mentioned that a while ago. Come on. I think this game is for one group of people. And honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I hope they have a really great time with it. Frosthaven, as a game, this is for people who have finished Gloomhaven and they really just want more, and they want something meatier and more complicated, and they just want more. And so for me to say that Frosthaven, it's not for people who've not really deep dived into Gloomhaven for a lot of time, that's fine, and who cares? Like, I've only got about halfway through the Gloomhaven campaign and it's been about 7 years. I'm just going to play Gloomhaven. Not played any of these and want to go? Jaws of the Lion, best place to start. If you've finished Gloomhaven and you are hungry for more, Frosthaven, definitely. If you haven't finished Gloomhaven, you've still got a bunch of stuff in that box and you're tempted by this big exciting new blue sibling, just go back to Gloomhaven. It's still what you want for now. And if you haven't got any new characters unlocked that you want to play as, just open one of the boxes. I won't tell anyone. Just open a box. Treat yourself. And that is the end of this giganto ramble about games, board games, and the people who love board games. And speaking of which, myself and Tom will be having another extended ramble on the podcast about Frosthaven. So if you want more thoughts and somebody else's thoughts on the teams, then do keep an eye on the podcast for that. And I've got nothing else to say at this point. So in a moment of panic, I'm just going to put the Frosthaven box on my head. And that's going to be the end of the video. Goodbye.